When my wife passed away, her wealthy boss called me and said, "I found something. Come to my office right now." Then he added, "And don't tell your son or your daughter-in-law. You could be in danger." When I got there and saw who was standing at the door, I froze. I'm going to tell you exactly who was standing at that door and why my knees nearly gave out when I saw them. But for any of it to make sense, you need to know about the 34 years that walked me up to it. If you're new here, stick around, because this story does not go where you think it's going. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Hit that like button, and if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a good time. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this one ends. My name is Harold. I'm 61 years old. I spent 31 years as a diesel mechanic at Kessler's Fleet Service, the last 12 of them running the shop floor, and I can tell you the year and make of a truck by the sound it makes cold starting in January. What I could not tell you, apparently, was what was happening inside my own house. I met Diane in the spring of 1991 when her Corolla died in the parking lot of the grocery store across from our shop. She came walking in wearing a yellow raincoat, told me the car was making a noise like a spoon in a garbage disposal, and stood over my shoulder the entire time I worked because, and I quote, she wasn't about to get swindled by a man with that much confidence in his own forearms. I undercharged her. She noticed. She came back 2 days later with a casserole and an itemized list of what I should have billed her, and she made me sit there while she went through it line by line. I married her 16 months later. I was 27. Best decision I ever made, and I once bought a 1987 F-250 for $400. We got 34 years. I want to say that plainly because everything that comes later in this story is ugly, and I need you to know what it was ugly against. 34 years of her stealing the blankets and denying it under oath. 34 years of her leaving grocery lists on the counter with little notes at the bottom. Things like, "Don't forget you love me," wedged between eggs and furnace filters. She worked as the executive assistant to Gerald Whitaker at Whitaker Commercial Properties for 24 years, and she ran that man's entire world. Contracts, schedules, secrets. Whitaker owned half the office space downtown, and Diane used to say he trusted her with things he wouldn't tell his own lawyers. I used to think that was just a thing people say about their jobs. It turned out to be the reason I'm alive to tell you this. We had one son, Derek, born in the summer of '93, 8 pounds even, screamed like a fire alarm for the first 6 months, and then turned into the sweetest kid on Hartwell Street. I coached his little league team for 4 seasons. He wasn't much of a hitter, but he was the kid who carried the equipment bag without being asked. I need you to hold on to that. The kid who carried the bag. Because I've spent a lot of nights since trying to figure out where that kid went, and I still don't have an answer. Every Sunday of his life, from the time he could sit in a high chair until the day this story ends, Diane made Sunday dinner. Roast chicken, usually. And every Sunday for 30 years, she filled Derek's plate first, before mine, before her own. It was a joke between us. I'd say, "I see how it is," and she'd say, "You can fix your own plate, Harold. You have those confident forearms. Remember the plate. It matters later." Derek married Vanessa 6 years ago. I'll be honest with you, because I've promised myself I'd be honest all the way through this. I liked her. Everybody liked her. She was polished in a way our family never was. The kind of person who remembered your coffee order and your sister's surgery date. At the wedding, she gave a toast, raised her glass, and said, "To family and to everything that comes with it." Everybody laughed and drank. I've thought about that sentence every day for the past year. Derek lost his sales job in 2020 and never really found his footing again. He and Vanessa started an online business, something with inventory and shipping that I never fully understood, and looking back was never really meant to be understood. Money got tight for them. It happens. Diane and I helped where we could. A transmission here, a rent month there, $4,000 once that we called a loan and all silently agreed never to mention again. That's what family is, we thought. You fill their plate first, and for a long time, that was the whole story. A mechanic, the love of his life, a son they'd have died for, and Sunday dinners on Hartwell Street. If you'd told me back then how this ends, I'd have laughed at you. Then I'd have thrown you out of my house. Here's when it started to turn, though I didn't see it turning. Nobody ever does. That's the thing about what happened to us. It didn't arrive like a storm. It arrived like weather. It started with visits. Derek and Vanessa had always come for Sunday dinner, but somewhere in the last year, Sundays grew a Wednesday. Then the Wednesdays grew a we were in the neighborhood. I remember telling Diane it was nice, having them around more. I remember her agreeing. I want to be fair to both of us here. When your struggling son starts showing up at your door, you don't ask why. You just set another plate. Around the same time, Diane's doctor changed her blood pressure prescription. Nothing dramatic. She'd been managing it for years, but the new routine had more moving parts. And one Sunday over dessert, Vanessa made an offer that, at the time, felt like grace. "Let me handle the pill organizer, Mom. Tuesdays and Fridays. That way there's no mix-ups and Harold doesn't have to hover." She actually said that. No mix-ups. She looked Diane in the eye when she said it, and my wife, who had run a commercial real estate empire's paperwork for a quarter-century, smiled and said, "That would be lovely, sweetheart." So that became the rhythm. Tuesdays and Fridays. Vanessa's little blue Honda in the driveway, the kettle on, the weekly organizer open on the kitchen counter with its 14 small doors, morning and night, Monday through Sunday. She'd sort the pills, stay for tea, straighten the mail. Helpful. Everyone said so. I said so. And Diane started to fade. I need to say this part slowly, because at the time it looked like nothing, and that's the entire point. It looked like age. She got tired earlier in the evening. evenings. She started calling the mornings foggy, said her thoughts felt like they were coming through a screen door. Twice at dinner she lost a word, just an ordinary word, colander once, and stared at her hand like it belonged to someone else while she reached for it. She told her doctor her heart felt like it skipped sometimes, like a record needle jumping. He adjusted her prescription. Then, 6 weeks later, he adjusted it again. And I remember him saying, half to himself, that he couldn't quite make sense of her numbers. One Friday in September, I came home early. A fleet job had canceled, and I walked into my own kitchen at 2 in the afternoon and stopped in the doorway because something about the picture was wrong and I couldn't name it. Vanessa was at the counter, alone, the pill organizer open in front of her, all 14 doors, and my wife, my 60-mile-a-week walker wife, was asleep on the couch in the middle of the afternoon. Vanessa didn't startle, I'll give her that. She looked up, smiled, and said, "She's just worn out from her walk." I told her I'd finish up. Then she closed the little doors one by one, kissed my cheek on the way out, and was gone. I did nothing. I want that on the record. I noticed something. Some animal part of me noticed something. And I hung my jacket on the hook and did nothing. Because she was family. And because my wife trusted her. And because I trusted my wife's judgment more than my own. If you take one thing from this story, take that. Then there was the paperwork. One night in early fall, Diane looked up from her book and asked me, casual as asking about the weather, "Did we sign something with Derek back in July? At the kitchen table? Power of attorney papers? Something like that, in case anything ever happened to us?" I said no. I'd have remembered. She frowned, just for a second, the way she did when a column didn't total, and said Derek had mentioned bringing something like that by, and she must have gotten confused. Then she went back to her book. I went back to the television. Somewhere in this house, that exact conversation is the moment I'd give 10 years of my life to have back. Vanessa, meanwhile, had developed a sudden interest in our real estate. Little comments, spaced out, never pushy. "This place is a lot of stairs for you two. You ever think about simplifying?" My friend Dana's a realtor. She says houses on this street are going crazy. I thought she was making conversation. She was taking measurements. The first week of that October, on a cold, gray Saturday, Diane spent the whole afternoon on her knees in the front bed planting tulip bulbs, 4 dozen of them, red and yellow, her jeans soaked through at the knees. I brought her coffee and told her she was crazy, planting things she wouldn't see until April. She sat back on her heels, looked at the dirt for a second, and said, "That's the whole point of tulips, Harold. You plant them for a version of spring you can't prove is coming." I know now what I didn't know then, that during those same weeks, my wife was preparing for more than spring. She was doing something quiet and enormous, and exactly one person on this earth knew about it, and he worked in a glass building downtown. She died on a Sunday morning, October 5th. I wasn't there. That's the part I'll carry. The furnace had been rattling, and I'd driven to the hardware store for filters, 20 minutes, maybe 25, and when I came around the corner onto Hartwell Street, there was an ambulance in my driveway with its lights turning and no siren, and every man my age knows what lights with no siren means, and I don't remember parking the truck. I remember the storm door standing open. I remember a paramedic named Josh. It was stitched on his shirt, saying words in a calm voice, "Sudden cardiac event," and I remember riding in the front of the ambulance because they wouldn't let me ride in the back, and by the time we reached the hospital, the woman who argued down a flea market vendor for a fruit bowl, who left love notes in the grocery lists, who filled our son's plate first for 30 years, was gone. She was 58 years old. She had a documented blood pressure history. Nobody asked a single question. Not the doctors, not the paramedics, not the county. And I have to be honest with you, neither did I. You don't ask questions while your whole world is being loaded into an ambulance. You just try to stay standing. Derek got there fast. Vanessa got there 20 minutes after him. And I remember, in that gray fluorescent hallway, being grateful she'd come at all. And I remember one detail that meant nothing to me then. Her hair was done. 10 on a Sunday morning, a family emergency, and her hair was done. She hugged me and took over. Called the funeral home before I'd even called my own brother. Handled the flowers, the notices, the casseroles. Everyone said we were lucky to have her. Everyone said she was a rock. For 9 days, I moved through my house like a man underwater. And on the 9th day, we buried my wife. And at 11:52 in the morning, my phone rang. The funeral was Tuesday, October 14th at Lakeview Memorial. It rained the way it does in October here, not falling so much as leaning on you. I wore the suit I'd bought for Derek's wedding because it was the only suit I owned, and I stood at the front of that room next to a casket and waited for any of it to feel real. About 40 people came, neighbors, 2 women from Diane's book club, guys from the shop with their hands folded like they were holding invisible hats. My brother drove down from Michigan. Derek and Vanessa sat in the front row, and here is what I noticed without letting myself notice it. Neither of them cried. Not at the viewing, not during the pastor, not once. Vanessa kept her phone in her lap under the funeral program, and every minute or so her thumb would move. And twice Derek leaned over and whispered something to her, quick and low, and she'd nod without looking at him. It didn't look like grief. It looked like logistics. I told myself people mourn in different ways. I was doing a lot of telling myself things that week. At 11:52 in the morning, in the middle of the pastor's closing words, my phone buzzed in my jacket. I'd have let it go. I swear to you I'd have let it go. But I saw the name on the screen. Gerald Whitaker. In 24 years, that man had never once called my personal phone. I stepped into the hallway with the organ music leaking through the door behind me, and the moment he spoke, my stomach dropped, because Gerald Whitaker is not a man whose voice shakes, and his voice was shaking. "Harold, I found something. Come come to my office right now. I asked him what he was talking about, what he found. He wouldn't say. And then he said the sentence I will hear for the rest of my life. And don't tell your son or your daughter-in-law. You could be in danger. I stood in that hallway with my wife in a casket 30 feet away and the rain ticking on the window. And I asked him if this was some kind of joke. And he said, Diane left something with me 3 weeks ago. She made me promise. Come now, come alone. And Harold, do not stop at home first. Then he hung up. You need to understand who this man was to understand why I got in the truck. Whitaker was 71 years old, owned buildings I couldn't afford to park near, and I'd met him maybe a dozen times over the years, company picnics, holiday parties, and every single time he was the calmest person in the room, the kind of man who remembered the janitor's kids' names. Hearing him rattled was like hearing a bank vault whimper. I went back inside for the last 10 minutes of my wife's funeral and didn't hear a word of it. When it ended and people began filing toward their cars for the burial, I found Derek and told him I had a meeting about Diane's pension and insurance paperwork that couldn't wait, and that I'd see everyone back at the house afterward for the reception. My son, on the day we buried his mother, barely looked up from his phone. Sure, Dad, whatever you need. Vanessa was already halfway across the parking lot, heels quick on the wet asphalt, talking low into her phone with her hand cupped around it. I stood there watching my daughter-in-law hurry away from her mother-in-law's funeral like she was late for a flight, and the cold thing that had been circling me all week finally landed. I drove downtown with the wipers on low, and my hands at 10 and 2 like the wheel might get away from me. Whitaker Commercial Properties takes up the top floors of a glass building on Commerce Street, the kind of lobby where your boots squeak. Pete at the security desk recognized me from the picnics and waved me through with his condolences. In the elevator, somewhere around the 9th floor, my phone buzzed. A text. Vanessa, everything okay? You left in a hurry? That smiley face. I must have stared at it for 3 floors. I didn't answer. The elevator opened on 14, and I turned toward the glass doors of Whitaker's suite, and that is the moment from the beginning of this story. Because standing at that door, waiting, were 2 people I had never seen before. A woman in a gray blazer and a heavy-set man with a folder under his arm, and the woman's jacket shifted when she turned, and I saw the badge on her belt. Detectives at the door, waiting for me, by name. Mr. Doyle? And I froze. Because when your wife is 9 days in the ground and 2 detectives are standing between you and the answers, your mind goes to exactly one place. They think you did it. My heart was doing something in my chest I couldn't afford at my age, and I had actually taken half a step backward toward the elevator when the glass door swung open behind them, and Gerald Whitaker, gray-faced, tie loose, said the 5 words that started everything. Harold, thank God, they're with me. His office was the kind of room designed to make you feel underdressed. Dark wood, a view of the river, a desk the size of my first apartment. He locked the door behind us, which I had never in my life seen a man do in his own office, and introduced the 2 detectives. The woman was Detective Alvarez, financial crimes. The heavy-set man was her partner. Nobody sat down for a minute. Everybody looked at me like I was a load-bearing wall they weren't sure about. Whitaker told it plain. 3 weeks before she died, on an ordinary Tuesday, Diane had come into his office at 7 in the morning before the phone started and closed the door. She put a sealed manila envelope on his desk and made him promise 3 things. Only Harold, only in person, only if something happens to me. He said he'd asked her, half joking, if she was planning on something happening, and she'd given him a look he'd never gotten from her in 24 years and said, Gerald, promise me. So he promised, and he put it in his safe, and he told himself it was estate planning, because that's what you tell yourself. Then she died, and for 8 days that envelope sat in his safe while he talked himself in and out of the promise, because opening it meant admitting what if something happens to me might have meant. The night before the funeral, he opened it. He said he read it twice, sat in his kitchen until 4 in the morning, and called the police when the sun came up. That's why the detectives were at the door. He'd already shown them everything. The call to me at 11:52 was the last promise he had left to keep. He slid the envelope across the desk. My name was on the front in Diane's handwriting, that neat, upright script that used to total grocery lists, and underneath it, only open if something happens to me. My hands are steady hands. 31 years of torque wrenches and fuel lines. They were not steady opening that envelope. Inside was a letter, 3 pages, and a small flash drive taped to the back of the last page. I'm not going to read you all of it. Some of it belongs to me, but I'll give you the parts that matter, and I'll give you the first line exactly as she wrote it, because I've read it enough times now that it's printed on the inside of my skull. If you're reading this, my heart didn't fail on its own. She wrote that she'd found money missing from our retirement account, $58,000. 4 transfers between June and September, each one authorized under a power of attorney dated in July, a document carrying both of our signatures. I never signed it, Harold, and I don't believe you did either. I checked your Ds. Your Ds don't loop. She wrote that she'd been feeling wrong since late summer, foggy, slow, her heart stumbling, and that she'd noticed the feeling kept time with the pill organizer, that there were extras in the little doors some weeks, small ones that didn't match anything her pharmacy had ever filled for her, and when she'd counted her bottles against the receipts, the numbers didn't hold. She wrote that she'd started photographing everything, the statements, the bottles, the signature, and putting it where nobody in the family would ever think to look because, and this is Diane in 11 words, the office is the one place none of them ever visited. And near the end, she wrote the paragraph I've never gotten through out loud, so you'll forgive me if I paraphrase. She wrote that she hoped to God she was wrong, that if she was wrong, she'd spend spend the rest of her life making it up to our son. But if I'm right, she wrote, then grief is going to make you stupid, and I need you to be smarter than your heart, Harold. Just once, for me. The flash drive had 3 folders. Alvarez plugged it into Whitaker's laptop and turned the screen toward me like a doctor turning an x-ray. Folder 1, bank statements, 4 transfers highlighted in yellow, the destination, an account in Derek and Vanessa's names. Folder 2, photographs of pharmacy receipts laid next to her pill bottles, with her handwritten counts in the margins, tidy little columns that didn't balance. Folder 3 had 1 file in it, a screenshot from the old tablet we kept in the kitchen for recipes, the one signed into everybody's everything because nobody in our family ever logged out of anything. A message thread. Vanessa, she's getting suspicious. We need to hurry. And the reply, from my son, from Derek, from the kid who carried the equipment bag. Keep it slow. Nobody questions a heart condition at her age. I'm told I asked for a glass of water. I don't remember it. I remember the room tilting a few degrees off its foundation and Whitaker's hand landing on my shoulder, and I remember staring at the words, keep it slow, until they stopped being words. Your child's name, under a sentence like that. There's no container for it. It doesn't go anywhere. It just stands in the middle of you. When I could hear again, Detective Alvarez was talking, and I will always be grateful for how she talked, level and unhurried, like we were going over an estimate. She said what Diane left was enough to open an investigation and nowhere near enough to close one. A screenshot can be challenged. A forged signature needs a forensic document examiner. Pharmacy records need warrants, and warrants need probable cause. And probable cause is a ladder you climb 1 rung at a time. And then she said the part about me. That power of attorney didn't just cover Diane. It covered our accounts, the house, everything I owned. Right now, Mr. Doyle, you're worth more to them cooperative than grieving. It's after the paperwork clears that I'd start to worry. That was the danger Whitaker meant. I was the second name on the document. I was the rest of the plan. Then she made the ask, and she made it looking me straight in the eye, which I respected then and respect now. They needed Derek and Vanessa comfortable. Comfortable people talk. So, go home. Say the meeting was pension paperwork. Grieve where they can see it. Let Vanessa keep helping. And with my written consent, they'd place a recorder in my own kitchen, and I would sit at my own table across from my own son and act like a broken old man for as long as it took. I want to ask you something, and I mean it. Put it in the comments, because I've wondered for a year how normal people would answer. If it were you, could you have done it? Could you have hugged them at your door? Because I sat in my truck in that parking garage for over an hour, and I'm not proud of every option I considered. What decided it was the house? I got home before the reception ended, shook hands, accepted casseroles, and that night, when everyone was gone, I stood in my kitchen in the dark. Diane's reading glasses were still on the nightstand upstairs. Her handwriting was still on the grocery list, stuck to the fridge, furnace filters in her hand, don't forget you love me, at the bottom. And on the counter, washed and closed and waiting for Tuesday, sat the pill organizer, all 14 little doors. I stood there looking at that thing for a long time. Then I called Alvarez and said one word. The next 11 days were the longest of my life. And on day 6, Vanessa nearly ended the whole thing without ever knowing it. Alvarez's text came Thursday, while Derek was at a job interview, and Vanessa had a nail appointment, both confirmed, because by then there was a rhythm to how carefully these people moved. He was in and out in 40 minutes. The recorder went where Alvarez and I had agreed, in the one object in that kitchen with diplomatic immunity. A heavy ceramic fruit bowl Diane had haggled down from $5 to $3 at a flea market 22 years ago and defended like a border ever since. Nobody in my family was allowed to so much as relocate that bowl. Remember the bowl. It earns its place in this story. The first dinner was that Wednesday. Vanessa brought a casserole in her softest voice. I had spent the afternoon rehearsing in the bathroom mirror like a lunatic, practicing being smaller, rounder in the shoulders, slower to finish sentences. It turns out the hardest part of playing a broken old man is that you're already most of the way there, and the acting is just letting them see it. She served my plate. She patted my hand. And somewhere between the casserole and the store-bought pie, she started in, gentle as a realtor at a funeral, which I suppose is exactly what she was. Dad, have you thought at all about the house? Dana says this street is going crazy right now. All those stairs. Mom would want you somewhere easier. Mom would want. I looked at my plate and said I couldn't think about that yet, and let my voice crack on yet. And I watched her exchange a glance with my son that they thought I didn't catch. Patience, the glance said. He's coming along. Then, over pie, she set down her fork and said, casual as commenting on the weather. Oh, someone from the church said they saw your truck downtown after the service. I didn't know the insurance people worked Sundays. And there it was. The floor of the conversation opened onto a 40-foot drop, and I heard myself say, from somewhere far away, that Whitaker's HR office had squeezed me in as a favor. Pension paperwork, survivor benefits, a mountain of forms. They were very kind, I said. Gerald came down personally. She held my eyes for 1 second longer than the sentence needed. Then she smiled and said that was so good of him, and cut me another piece of pie I hadn't asked for. I ate every bite of it. I have no idea what it tasted like. Day 6 was the Tuesday, and day 6 is when it nearly all came apart. The tech had come back to swap a battery and reposition the unit, 20-minute job, unmarked van in the driveway, and he was still inside when I looked up from the porch and saw Vanessa's blue Honda coming up Hartwell Street. Out of habit, you understand. Tuesday, pill day. There were no more pills to sort, and she came anyway, and I have thought a long time about what that means. means, and every answer is worse than the last. I don't remember deciding anything. I remember being down the steps and in the driveway with the mail in my hand before her car door was all the way open, telling her the house was upside down, plumbers in there, kitchen's torn open, water's off, whole thing's a mess, come see what your mother-in-law did to the garden. And I walked her, arm in arm, away from my own front door, around the side yard, both of us performing a stroll while my heart tried to exit through my collarbone. She stopped at the front bed, the turned black earth where Diane had spent her last good Saturday on her knees, and said, "What did she plant here?" And I said, "Spring." She planted spring. Behind us, I heard the van door slide, and the engine, and gravel, and Vanessa turned her head at the sound, and I said, "There goes the plumber. $70 to tell me he has to order a part." And she laughed, and we stood over my wife's tulip bulbs, the two of us. And I thought, you have no idea what's under your feet, either of you. I want to tell you about the garage, too, because this story isn't honest without it. That Saturday, Derek came by alone to help me move some boxes, and we ended up standing at my workbench the way we used to when he was 10, and he picked up Diane's gardening gloves from where she'd left them and just held them, and my son's face came apart. Not performed, real. He said, "She used to stand right there and time my oil changes with the kitchen timer. Remember? She'd yell penalty if I dropped a bolt." And for about 90 seconds, standing next to that boy in the smell of motor oil, the whole plan cracked down the middle inside me. This was my kid, the equipment bag kid. I had the words in my mouth, "Son, tell me she did this and you didn't know. Tell me and we'll fix it. I fix things. It's the one thing I know how to do." And then Derek set the gloves down, wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand, and said, "Hey, Vanessa thinks we should get the house appraised. Just so you know what you're sitting on. No pressure." 90 seconds. That's how long the crack lasted. He patched it himself. The Sunday came. 11 days in. I made roast chicken because that is what Diane made, and it came out dry because I am not Diane. And Derek and Vanessa sat at the table where he'd eaten 1,000 childhood dinners, and the bowl sat in the middle of it with the bananas and the unopened mail, listening. At 7:40, I pushed my chair back and said I was tired, and Vanessa said, "Get some rest, Dad, we'll clean up." And I climbed the stairs like a man twice my age, and then sat down silently on the top step in the dark, where I could hear the kitchen through the old vent, which is a thing you learn raising a teenager in that house. For 20 minutes, it was dishes and small talk. Then water shut off, chairs moved, and Vanessa's voice dropped into a register I had never heard from her, flat and quick, a work voice, and said, "Once he signs off on selling the house, we're done. We don't even need the power of attorney anymore." And my son, my own son, in the kitchen, his mother filled his plate in for 30 years, said, "Just don't get sloppy like you did with Mom." That pharmacist almost caught the refill pattern, and Vanessa laughed. I need you to understand that she laughed, an easy laugh, a Tuesday laugh, and said, "Nobody double checks an old woman's heart medication." I sat on the top stair with my fist against my mouth and did not make a sound. 31 years of engine noise has ruined my hearing for most things, but I will hear that laugh with perfect clarity until the day I die. Then, under it, I heard the thing that still gives me a cold feeling behind the ribs. Dishes stacking, Vanessa tidying, the way she always tidied, and her voice saying, "This bowl is so ugly. I don't know why he keeps it out," and the small scrape of ceramic starting to slide on wood. And Derek said, "Leave it. Mom's bowl. He doesn't let anybody touch it." The scrape stopped. The bowl stayed. My son protected the one object in that kitchen that was, at that exact moment, recording him. Diane bought that thing for $3 22 years ago. Best money anyone in this family ever spent. Alvarez picked up the recorder Monday morning, parked 2 streets over, wearing a windbreaker like a woman looking at a used lawnmower. She listened to it in my kitchen with her arms folded and her face doing absolutely nothing. And when it ended, she looked at me for a moment and said quietly, "You did that for 11 days. It's the closest thing to a medal I ever got." Then she told me there was one more thing they needed, and it was the thing I'd been dreading since the office, and there was no way through this story around it. The last thing they needed was Diane. Alvarez said the word exhumation, the way you'd hand someone a heavy box, slow, both hands, watching their grip. The recording gave them conspiracy and the fraud. The forged document and the pharmacy trail were coming together. But to charge anyone with what was actually done to my wife, the county needed toxicology, and toxicology needed Diane, and Diane was 9 days plus 11 more into the ground I'd put her in wearing her blue dress. I signed the order at my kitchen table with the same pen we used for Christmas cards. I had buried my wife once. I was agreeing to do a version of it twice. They did it on a Thursday at 7 in the morning, before the cemetery opened, canvas screens up around the plot. I didn't have to be there. I went anyway because 34 years earns you the hard mornings too, and I stood at a distance in my work jacket and told her out loud that I was sorry and that it was almost over and that she'd been right about everything, which she would have enjoyed hearing. A groundskeeper 20 feet away studied a rake like it was scripture and pretended not to hear a word. Good man. Then we waited. Toxicology takes weeks, and the weeks were their own kind of trial because life had to keep looking normal. Vanessa texted me listings. Derek came by and changed my furnace filters, the exact filters I'd been buying the morning his mother died, and I stood in my own basement making small talk with him about airflow. Meanwhile, out of sight, the machine was grinding. The forensic examiner finished with the power of attorney and reported what Diane had already told me from beyond the grave in fewer words. The signatures were simulations, practiced copies. Whoever wrote these, the report said, worked from samples, not observation. My D's don't loop. Diane crossed her 7s. You can imitate what what a signature looks like. You can't imitate the person it came out of. The pharmacy warrants landed the same week, and the trail lit up like a dashboard. A pharmacy 2 counties over had already internally flagged irregular refill activity months earlier, quiet diversions, small amounts, a pattern almost nobody would catch. The tech responsible was a man named Travis, Vanessa's cousin. That's what sloppy had meant. That's who had almost been caught. The pills in my wife's organizer had a family tree of their own. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang while I was under a customer's flatbed, and Alvarez said 4 words I had been waiting 5 weeks for. The results are back. What was in Diane's system was a prescription medication. It was not one of hers. And it was present at a level, her exact words, that no physician prescribes and no patient survives indefinitely. My wife did not have a cardiac event. My wife had an arithmetic problem, administered twice a week by a woman with a kettle on. Alvarez asked how I wanted to do the arrest. She didn't have to ask. She'd earned the right to just come take them. But she asked, and I told her the truth, at my table. It ended at that table for Diane. It could end there for them. So I made the call I'd been rehearsing for a month. I told Vanessa she'd been right all along. The house was too much for me. The stairs, the memories, all of it. And I was ready to talk about selling. I wish I could play you the sound she made. It was joy. She caught it, dressed it up as relief. Oh, Dad, I think that's so healthy. But I heard it. The first honest half-second joy. They came Sunday at 5. Vanessa walked in carrying a folder of listings and a bouquet from the grocery store, and I want you to guess what the flowers were. Tulips. Red and yellow grocery store tulips in my house in October. She put them in my arms and hugged me and said, "I'm so proud of you, Dad." The bowl sat on the table between us, empty now, retired, a veteran. We all sat down. She uncapped a pen, and Detective Alvarez stepped out of my hallway. I have watched a lot of faces in 61 years, but I have never watched one do what Vanessa's did in the next 4 seconds. It went from smug to confused to a gray I've only otherwise seen on people coming out of anesthesia. 4 seconds, top to bottom. Her partner came through the front door with 2 uniformed officers behind him, and Alvarez said their names, both names, full and legal, and the word warrant, and the words murder and Diane Doyle in the same sentence, and Vanessa stood up so fast her chair went over backwards and started talking in a voice I'd never heard, high and fast. "This is insane. He's grieving. He's confused. He doesn't know what he's agreeing to. Derek, tell them your father is confused." Derek didn't run. He didn't argue. My son looked at the tulips, then at the bowl, then at me, and his whole face came down like a garage door, and he said, "Dad, I never wanted her to actually die. I swear to God. It was only supposed to keep her confused enough to sign. Only supposed to keep her confused enough to sign." I stood up. I was not going to say anything. Alvarez had coached me clean, but there are 34 years in me that outrank any coaching, and I looked at my boy while they cuffed him at his mother's table, and I said the only thing I had left in the register. "Your mother filled your plate first every Sunday for 30 years, and you sat across from her counting down to the house." He didn't answer. There wasn't an answer. They read them their rights in the kitchen, where Diane taught him long division, and the last thing Vanessa said on her way out my door, screamed it actually, was that this family had been falling apart long before she got here. Maybe so, but it took her to finish the job. The grocery store tulips were still on the table when the house went quiet. I stood there a long time. Then I put them in water, because Diane would have, and I sat with them until it got dark. I'll give you the legal end of it quickly, because the legal end was never really the end. Derek took a plea. Financial exploitation of an elder, forgery, conspiracy. 6 years. He never once made them prove it, and I've decided to let that count for something. Some small, load-bearing something. Vanessa fought. Of course she fought. She sat through a 2-week trial in a gray cardigan chosen by her attorney, looking like a Sunday school teacher, right up until the prosecution played the kitchen recording through the courtroom speakers. You could hear the dishes. You could hear the chairs. And then you could hear her own voice, easy as a Tuesday, say, "Nobody double-checks an old woman's heart medication," followed by that laugh, in a room where nobody was laughing. I watched 2 jurors look at their own hands. The jury was out for under 4 hours. 15 years. 6 for the money they gave my son. 15 for my wife they gave her. And I sat in the gallery between my brother and Gerald Whitaker and felt exactly nothing lift, because it turns out verdicts don't give anything back. They just stop the bleeding. Travis, the cousin with the pharmacy badge, got 4 years and will never legally count pills again. Derek writes to me. There's a shoebox on the closet shelf, his mother's closet, and the letters go in it unopened. 17 of them now. I'm not ready. I might be someday, and I've made my peace with the word someday. The money came back through restitution. All $58,000, though I'd have traded every dollar in the house it was meant to steal for one more Saturday of her yelling penalty at somebody in my garage. Gerald Whitaker comes by on Thursdays now. 71 years old, owns half of Commerce Street, sits at my kitchen table and loses at cribbage like it's his job. He tells me stories about Diane at the office, 24 years of them, and I've learned things about my own wife that make me love her in brand new tenses. She kept a photo of me on her desk the whole time, apparently. Me in the driveway in 1998, holding a rebuilt carburetor up like a trophy fish. He said she used to tell people, "That's Harold. He fixes things." This April, right on schedule, the tulips came up. 4 dozen, red and yellow, along the front bed where she'd knelt in the cold with soaked knees, planting them for a version of spring she couldn't prove was coming. I stood on my porch with a cup of coffee and looked at them for a long time. The neighbors probably thought I was admiring flowers. And then there's the last thing, and I've saved it because she saved it. A few weeks after sentencing, Whitaker showed up on a Thursday holding something he said he should have given me months earlier, but that Alvarez had needed for the case file, and then, I think, that he'd needed for himself. When Diane left him that manila envelope, there'd been a second envelope clipped to it, a small one, his name on it. Inside, one index card, her upright handwriting, her instructions to him if the worst happened, which detective's name she trusted from the company's old fraud case, where the copies were what to do first. Practical to the last line. And then, at the bottom of the card, set apart, underlined once, the final thing my wife ever wrote, not to me, about me. 2 words. Protect Harold. The house is quiet now. It used to hurt. These days, it mostly feels honest. Her bowl is still on the table. $3 of flea market ceramic that heard everything and held the line. Her glasses are still on the nightstand, and I've stopped pretending I'll move them. And every Sunday, I make a roast chicken that comes out a little less dry than the one before. And I set the table. And some Sundays, it's Whitaker and my brother and the kid from 2 doors down who's learning engines off me. And some Sundays, it's just me and the tulips through the window. Either way, I fill the plates. She asked one man to protect me, and she left behind everything he'd need to do it. She was 3 steps ahead of all of them, foggy mornings and all, right up to the end. Protect Harold. She did. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and answer me the question I asked you in the middle. Could you have sat at that table for 11 days? Because I still don't know how I did. Subscribe if you want more true stories like this one. Take care of the people who fill your plate. I'll see you in the next one.